morning, my Bitcoin boys and Bitcoin girls, and welcome back to another episode of the Blockchain Report. I'm Hank Hudson, coming to you live from San Francisco, where the scooters are disposable, the rent is astronomical, and the AI chatbots are more insightful than your own therapist. It's a special episode today here, and we've got more than just Bitcoin charts and ETF flows. Today, we've got conversations with some of the sharpest voices in Bitcoin right now. SANDER Andersen from H100, SAMSON MOW from Jan3, and BEN WERKMAN from Swan will all be joining us to talk shop. So hit that like button, follow and subscribe to RoxomTV and yours truly at Hank at RoxomTV, and let's dive into the circus right here on this special edition of the Blockchain Report. Let's go. All right, so we're getting things underway this morning with our first guest of the day. He is a world-class connector, a visionary entrepreneur, and someone who's been building game-changing companies since most of us were still figuring out our first job. He's a former competitive swimmer who's taken that same discipline into the world of finance, bridging Bitcoin and private equity to open doors that were once locked for everyday investors. As the founder of FinPeers, he's on a mission to modernize private markets, break down borders, and build what he calls an intergalactic financial system. Please give a big Blockchain Report welcome to the one and only SANDER Andersen. SANDER, welcome to the show. We are so happy to have you here, and so is our studio audience. How are you this morning? Happy Monday.
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, the pleasure is all ours. SANDER, I want to get into it right off the jump here. I would like to start off with maybe a little bit about your personal backstory, because I think it helps people kind of understand the why behind what you're building now. So you've had kind of an interesting background here. You went from competitive swimming to building companies. How did that athlete mindset shape the way you're working today?
I think that's the fundamental of everything, to be honest. I think most of my childhood I spent in a swimming pool, competing more or less against myself, because that's what you do in swimming. You try to be better and improve your time. And I very much like using the same structure in my professional career and as an entrepreneur. I started when I was 17. Started building digital companies, and from 2017 I slowly moved more and more into the crypto industry and ended up in a Bitcoin only world.
Yeah, that's the only place to be, my friend. I definitely get it. So you said you kind of got into the space around 2017. I am always interested with people in the space. What was that moment, that orange pill moment, like for them? What was that like for you? How did you find yourself getting integrated into the world of Bitcoin initially?
It actually took me quite a while to be Bitcoin only, and I think that's why I'm Bitcoin only today. I started more in the Ethereum space. The moment when I understood the potential here was when I saw that you could connect these global digital communities and start building together. And initially, I was quite interested in the programmability part of things, which is not actually my thing. So I did a lot of mistakes. And after I moved to Switzerland and doubled down on Bitcoin, since then things have gone a lot better.
Yeah, the road with Bitcoin's usually an up and to the right one. So I think we can all agree that seems to be the path worth traveling. But you said it took you some time, and that seems to be a common thread with most people getting into the space. Even the Michael Saylors of the world, apprehensive at first, they do the research, and then they're like, oh, this is all really starting to click now. Was Bitcoin your first move into the space, or were you said it was Ethereum was the first, and then what ultimately made you make that change? You just got deeper into the rabbit hole, and then it just all started clicking that there's Bitcoin and then there's everything else?
No, I invested both in Bitcoin and Ethereum, but back then it was not a big amount of money, but I spent most of my time on Ethereum. But at the end of the day, especially after I got my first son, I started thinking a little bit more long term and started thinking, okay, how is the world actually looking for my son in the future? And then it clicked for me that Bitcoin is actually changing everything, and it actually ends consumerism. It's actually it's the money printer's fault for many of the problems we have today, and Bitcoin fixed many of these things. And more importantly, when I started FinPeers, which is a family office community investing now only into Bitcoin investments, I started also to understand the potential of the asset class conquering the bigger pockets of money out there. And that's when we spent 100% of our time into the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, you know, we find ourselves kind of falling into these same traps, like especially early on, chasing those quick bucks. And I was guilty of that initially in the space too. But then when you start looking back long term, Bitcoin just makes more and more sense for our, you know, financial and monetary futures. And you said when you had a son, that really seemed to change for you. And I totally get that. And now you're building FinPeers. And I would love for you to kind of give us a simple breakdown of that for our audience that might not already be familiar with this project.
So basically what FinPeers is doing is that we provide access to the Bitcoin ecosystem, especially targeting family offices and high net worth individuals. And we also own another company, H100, which is currently the biggest treasury company, Bitcoin treasury company out of the Nordics, holding close to 800 Bitcoin now. And what we saw there was the institutional and high net worth demand for Bitcoin treasury companies, but FinPeers also provides liquidity to over-collateralized Bitcoin loans and Bitcoin hedge funds, and basically trying to be the partner for high net worth individuals and family offices when they want to allocate to this industry.
Got it, got it. And you mentioned the Bitcoin Treasury Company and that you guys have your own Bitcoin Treasury. That has been the big hot topic of 2025, seemingly for sure. We're seeing new companies pop up with their own treasuries. It seems like every day right now. When did you get into the Bitcoin Treasury business, and why do you think that's such a great long-term play as we continue to build out the Bitcoin ecosystem?
So first of all, we started to follow Sailor quite early, but it really clicked for me that all the local markets will have a Bitcoin Treasury company when we saw what MetaPlanet was doing. And immediately after that, we started looking, okay, who in Europe is doing this? And back then it wasn't many. And we ended up being the first Bitcoin treasury company out of Sweden, and now taking a leading position in the Nordics in general.
Very amazing. So you're a trailblazer of sorts up that way. That's incredible. My stepfather is Swedish, so I've had some time in Gothenburg. I know it a little bit. I got to go back. It's a beautiful country. And I was doing some research on you before we had you on the show, and I saw something that said you in the past have mentioned that you feel like private markets are a little old school. I would love for you to kind of give our audience an example of how you feel things are currently still stuck in the past and how you're helping build for this new monetary future right now, specifically with FinPeers.
So yeah, what we are strong believers in tokenization, and I think most of the tokenization will actually happen on top of Bitcoin, and more specifically on the liquid sidechain, where you basically can peg in and peg out Bitcoin and make all your investments Bitcoin denominated at the end of the day, because I think many people starts to be Bitcoin denominated now, but you still need cash flow. You still need to invest into businesses. And I think having that layer where you can like invest with your Bitcoin or your stable coin into a more seamless ecosystem where you don't need to go public, but you still can use what we see as digital distribution. We personally believe that three things are very important to build billion-dollar companies in the future. It's one is digital distribution. The other one is digital asset. You need to access it as a digital asset. And third, you need digital workers. Digital workers can be people on X sharing and like this, like you need to have people helping you get the message out, but also eventually AI working for you and your companies. So what we have done at FinPeers is trying to be the liquidity layer where we can educate investors to invest into these tokenized assets. We acknowledge that it's still early. I think Bitcoin treasury companies is one step in the right direction, which at least involve digital assets and digital distribution. But at the end of the day, I think we will see more or less the full private markets will go to be tokenized, and I think most of it will happen on top of the Bitcoin blockchain.
Yeah, well put, well put. And on your platform, you use the blockchain, right? And I would love for you, a big part of what we try to do here on the Blockchain Report is make these technical terms and new things a little more accessible to the masses, right? So for someone outside of the tech world, how does the blockchain actually make investing easier or better for people as we move forward?
So most of the traditional financial world is very siloed. So if you want to invest into the Swedish stock markets, you need to open up an account with a broker that has access. If you turn the whole structure around with tokenization, you can have one wallet accessing everything. It's basically an internet layer where you have one wallet access to all the investments, and you can basically build the whole financial systems around internet first, and basically remove all these silo barriers that you see in the traditional industry. Tokenization also opens up for listing your company earlier. For example, you have a startup, you don't need to go to the local market. If you have a great X profile or, I don't know, a TikTok video that goes viral, you can actually start raising funds and building your company in an internet native way. And I think that's the future. And I think basically what you're doing is making your company digital and accessible by everyone.
I love that. And that's really, I see a common thread with a lot of these Bitcoin-focused companies, right, is making finance more accessible to everybody, because it's a space that has just been dominated by the big players for so long, and we're kind of democratizing the monetary world order as we move forward to the future. And at FinPeers, you found a way for smaller investors to team up and then get into bigger deals. Can you break down how that process works for us?
So what we basically do is not to be too technical, but we set up a specific company that invests the full ticker that is often required. So in a good deal, the one that provides the deal is in a good position, so they can tell, okay, 10 million is minimum. And you might not have 10 million, but what you can do with a specific SPV that are tokenized is to give more people access to that 10 million and then invest into the popular company. So it's basically a way of giving people access in a more democratized way without needing to invest that big ticket.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah, no, I appreciate the breakdown of that. And at FinPeer, you work across many different countries, not just the Nordic ones, Sweden, Norway, Finland. I guess my question regarding that is, how do you keep everything compliant while still moving quickly and innovating new products? That seems like an absolute headache. How do you go about that?
So as long as it's a private placement, and we right now only deal with professional investors, which makes things a little bit easier, but we will open up for more people eventually. And Switzerland has such a good regulation infrastructure that makes it quite transparent for us of how we can structure this vehicle that invest into the target company.
Is that why you're based in Switzerland? Is it because Switzerland is known as being a pretty crypto-friendly country? They're probably one of the most crypto-friendly in the world. So how does being based there give you guys a strategic advantage for what you're trying to accomplish right now?
I think the DLT law itself, like the blockchain law of Switzerland, which are very easy to understand. You can go to the regulator, you can get a very quick answer. I think that's the strategic advantage being here. Switzerland has such a long history, everything from Ethereum Foundation and more and more crypto products. You have big crypto banks like Signum, Bitcoin Swiss. It's quite integrated into the society, and you have a lot of expertise from lawyers to accountants to audits to how this new digital asset class work.
I mean, even before crypto, right, Switzerland has always been considered one of the, if not the best place in the world to store any kind of funds or assets that you may have. But a big issue within the crypto community, and we see it all the time, is the security element as we kind of navigate out of this Wild West era of crypto and Bitcoin into a more structured system going forward as these new guardrails are getting placed in, in each country. And it's all, like we kind of talked about, different from country to country. If someone was with FinPeers, for instance, and they lost access to their account, how do you make sure that someone's investment is still safe and they can get access to it if they were to lose it initially? Like, these are things I'm always thinking about as we build these new products into this kind of new frontier.
Yeah, so the good thing about these security tokens is that they are within the financial regulation. So if you lose your access to your wallet, we can always recover that wallet since you have the legal document that you own that part of the company. So it already exists technology that can do that.
Got it. And who is in the FinPeers community right now? Is it mostly wealthy individuals? I know you mentioned family offices. Is it a mix? Like, who are you really appealing to right now, especially for people in our audience that are interested in the services that you provide?
I think they're in general optimists when it comes to technology, and many of them are Bitcoin holders. I mean, a lot of our success has been in Bitcoin products. So basically, like, yeah, if you want to invest into the Bitcoin ecosystem, that's like our sweet spot of investors currently.
Is Bitcoin always been the plan from day one, or were you ever like considering Ethereum or other options in terms of investing, or are you guys always been Bitcoin centric from the jump?
No, so we started as a borderless technology investment provider, but we quickly understood that Bitcoin itself is an industry that we personally believe in. I personally allocated a lot of my personal funds to Bitcoin. So supporting the Bitcoin and being the investor relationship of Bitcoin and building on top of Bitcoin is where we wanted to spend our time. And so more or less only Bitcoin and Bitcoin related investments now.
Okay. I think a lot of people share that sentiment, and why we're seeing a lot of Bitcoin focused or almost Bitcoin only companies right now. Who would you say at this moment would be your closest competitor in this space? And how does FinPeers, what do you guys do to actually differentiate yourself and stand out from those competitors right now?
I think at the end of the day, we do capital raising, and so we compete with many of the big investment banks. But our like niche is that we do more or less Bitcoin only, and therefore we have access to the big profiles in the industry. We know the best hedge funds. We know very, very good access to early stage, all the way up to the Bitcoin treasury companies. We can connect investors directly with the stakeholders in the industry that have been here for many, many years already. And since we do that every day, it gives us a competitive advantage over those that provides all the other investments as well.
That makes a lot of sense. And for our audience out there that's watching us and they're listening to all this new information about FinPeers and what you do, if one of them wanted to join FinPeers tomorrow, what would that journey look like from them signing up to investing in their first deal? Can you walk us through that process?
So we have a very white glove services at the moment. We have capacity to onboard and understand each investor. They will send us an email or click the become a member button on the website, and we'll set up interview or a call with them to truly understand their demand and why they want to allocate to the Bitcoin industry, and there also map out what potential investments we can help them with.
And as a company that services people from across the globe, do you notice any trends or between different areas of the world? Like, I mean, do you have investors that are from the United States, or are they primarily in Europe right now, or is it just everybody everywhere? This is a Bitcoin world and we're all living in it.
Yeah, this is a Bitcoin world and we're all living it. I think if we see demand from all around the world, public companies has actually made it a little bit easier for us because we can tap into the regulated market and it's easier to onboard, but we can do that with also with private investments and eventually also fully tokenized investments.
Okay. And now that we're living in this Bitcoin world, what is your vision for FinPeers let's say 5 years from now? Like, what does success look like then? And what do you expect Bitcoin to be at that time? I mean, you don't have to necessarily give me a price prediction, but how much more integrated into the financial system would you expect Bitcoin to be in just 5 years from now?
I think in 5 years, it's already taken up most of the big markets, to be honest, especially when it comes to fixed income products. I think Bitcoin per share is going to be a key metric that most investors will have as their KPI, and FinPeers will help the investors increasing Bitcoin per share and get a Bitcoin return, and not like necessarily measuring everything in dollar, which devalue itself with 5 to 8% every year. So our goal is to find investments that can increase your Bitcoin stack over time with different strategies and do that only.
How close do you think in 5 years from now we'll be to, a Bitcoin standard? Is the dollar still going to be the main currency of the world, or are we rapidly approaching a turning point or an inflection point where everybody's actually seeing the world through the lenses of Bitcoin?
I think most companies will hold Bitcoin in their balance sheet. I think that will be the superior asset to hold to protect your hard-earned money, either as an individual or a company. And we will see that in most assets, to be honest. I think we will see Bitcoin mixed with real estate. We will see Bitcoin mixed with private equity. We will see a Bitcoin as part of a better financing deal. I think it's just like Bitcoin is a superior collateral. When you see these Bitcoin over-collateralized Bitcoin loans, I think you would rather invest into that compared to any of the other private credit products out there. Because you can get the same return and it's over-collateralized and it's zero operational risk as you see in the traditional private credit markets. When you lend to an over-collateralized Bitcoin loan, you have the Bitcoin there, it's 100% over-collateralized. And if they don't pay you, you can sell that a very liquid asset. So I see Bitcoin eating up balance sheets. I see Bitcoin eating up the debt and fixed income market. And I think a lot of the investors will start thinking, okay, do I actually increase Bitcoin per share here or increase my Bitcoin stack? Because Bitcoin will be the hurdle rate, especially for risk investments.
Yeah, and the Bitcoin per share term we've seen really grow in popularity with the Bitcoin treasury companies, of which you guys are one of. Which always begs the question for me, and I would love to get your thoughts on this. Do you feel like the Bitcoin treasury play is getting overhyped at all right now? It seems to be moving so fast, and you have companies that are following Michael Saylor's playbook, but not everybody is in the same position as Strategy, right? Where they've been buying Bitcoin since 2020. So if we were to potentially see a large correction, as we've seen many times in Bitcoin's past, we could see some of these companies that bought in at 120 be well underwater if we're at 90K. Do you think we're in danger of that at all, or are we entering a new phase of Bitcoin's price cycle where it doesn't fluctuate in the normal halving cycles we've seen previously because there's so much institutional money and governments that are finally getting on board? What are your thoughts about that as we kind of enter this new era of Bitcoin?
I mean, to answer the first question about like what happens if the Bitcoin goes down, a long-term thinking Bitcoin treasury company will still raise capital and still use the capital markets to increase Bitcoin per share, which is the key metric. I think if you don't believe in the long-term value of Bitcoin, you should never invest into Bitcoin treasury companies. And it's quite dangerous to actually evaluate Bitcoin treasury companies in dollars. You should really measure them in Bitcoin, because that's the path we are going into. We want to increase Bitcoin per share and give more Bitcoin to our shareholders over time. That's why you should buy Bitcoin treasury companies in general. If you only believe in Bitcoin, buy Bitcoin and keep it in cold storage, and everyone should do that as well. But if you want an actively managed Bitcoin vehicle, like a Bitcoin treasury company, then you should measure, are they able to increase Bitcoin per share over time? And there you can actually use the bear market to be more efficient, acquiring more Bitcoin and increasing Bitcoin per share faster. What you should be aware of is how is the debt structure of these Bitcoin treasury companies. In our example, we have 5-year terms, 0% interest rates, and no liquidation risk in between. So you believe Bitcoin will be worth more in 5 years than it is today. So if it falls down 50%, it doesn't impact our company. The second thing we do is that we do Bitcoin denominated debt, which is if we take on 1 Bitcoin as debt, we owe back the Bitcoin. So it doesn't necessarily change anything. If the Bitcoin price goes down in dollar, we just return back the 1 Bitcoin. It doesn't put any additional credit risk on the company. So bear markets is for accumulating more Bitcoin. It's always been like that, and that's also true for Bitcoin treasury companies.
Is that how your Bitcoin accumulation strategy, you expect it to play out as you, I assume, continue to try and put more Bitcoin on your balance sheets? Do you guys wait for what you anticipate to be bear markets and then load up? Or are you like Michael Saylor and you buy when you buy, because for every Bitcoin you don't buy, you're gonna be missing out on $13 million in the future, or whatever he says? What is your strategy like at FinPeers, and or H100, how did you come to that conclusion of that's the best way for us to accumulate Bitcoin as we move on to the future?
No, we follow very much what Michael Saylor is doing. We think that is the right thing to do, because in each part of the cycle, you have different options and different strategies and different opportunities to accumulate more Bitcoin. And therefore, it's better to be in the market than timing the market. That's at least my personal experience, that I'm not good enough to timing the market, so I should just stay in the market.
Mm-hmm. And as we're seeing this rapid expansion of Bitcoin treasury companies and having their own Bitcoin treasuries this year specifically, there's a lot of companies out there that I'm sure are wondering, should we be doing the same, especially for like big companies, right? We saw Tesla buy Bitcoin years ago, but we haven't really heard of any active accumulation anytime recently. But if a company was to come to you and they said, hey, we're considering doing a Bitcoin treasury play of our own, what would you tell them to convince them that it is in fact a good idea for their company's future?
So it's 2 different things you need to consider. Then one is, do you want to be a Bitcoin treasury company? Bitcoin treasury companies is all about increasing Bitcoin per share. But if you have an operating business and want to take advantage of your surplus capital, and you want to store that, and instead of paying dividends, you want to increase shareholder value by buying more Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin like a share buyback, or increasing net asset value in a different way. That's also a brilliant idea. I think you will also see asset classes coming together, like real estate plus real estate plus Bitcoin, and real estate plus private equity, where you can actually ride the wave of Bitcoin and adding operational excellence on top of it. So you should really like understand, like, do I want to be a Bitcoin treasury company, all about raising capital, finding capital structure to increase Bitcoin per share over time, and that's your product? Or are you an operating business with a Bitcoin on the balance sheet strategy, which is also great, but it's how you communicate that to the market is different. And because putting Bitcoin on your balance sheet doesn't necessarily make you a Bitcoin treasury company.
Sure. No, that makes sense. And in your business, do you find like your clientele, is it much younger, or do you find yourself having to ever orange pill people from the older guard in traditional finance and get them in? And like, how do you go about convincing someone who manages a lot of wealth but is kind of stuck in old world finance? How do you tell them to do things differently now, and why should they be doing it differently?
So I think I haven't rarely seen someone spending 20 hours or more studying Bitcoin that didn't end up allocating at least some of their portfolio to Bitcoin. And I think many of those that have seen the real estate wave understand that, okay, this is also like a type of digital real estate, and you see the demand and ask themselves, okay, do my grandchildren or my children, are they more likely to buy Bitcoin or an extra apartment? I think many people comes up with the conclusion that they will buy Bitcoin, and therefore I should allocate some, because the demand of that fixed supply asset that are incorruptible and easy to transfer all around the world and internet native, that should be a good idea. And after studying 20 more hours, they start to be more and more Bitcoin maxi. And we have seen this over and over again. And even like very sophisticated big family offices ends up having maybe 20 or 30% of their wealth in Bitcoin or Bitcoin related products.
So it sounds like anyone who's not already investing some of their money into Bitcoin, it's probably an issue of not having the educational aspect down yet, right? They haven't put in the time, because once you do it, it seems inevitable that people kind of orange pill themselves once they've put in that time to research what Bitcoin is all about. Do you have any recommendations for books or other podcasts or places people should be going to get some really great info so they can kind of start their own journey into the Bitcoin space if they haven't already?
Yeah, I think every journey into Bitcoin, I think, is unique. And I think like the Bitcoin Standard is a great book, for example, which basically like give you a little bit of history. It gives you a little bit about the asset, and that's a great place to start from a book perspective. But if you have a decent amount of money, and send us or everyone send us a message, and we can put you in touch with someone that can really teach you or maybe share their experience into, because we are humans at the end of the day, and we like to learn from others. And that's what we try to do with FinPeers, like be the safe place where people can reach out and ask the question without like needing to go online or feel dumb, but we can educate them, because we are in the same team, and hopefully eventually they will invest with us. And so it's an investment worth doing for us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you guys are active in educating your clients so that they can feel, safe and well informed when they're making these large investments, because we all know it's very important to everyone. What is the best way for people to go about? If someone in our audience is like, this FinPeers stuff sounds pretty interesting, I want to get more information of how I could potentially invest my hard-earned money with you guys, what's the best way for them to get in touch with you? Should they go to the website, or what do you recommend?
So the website is quite efficient, or reach out to me on X, and I'll happily set up a meeting with me or my team, and we start from there.
Love it. And I know we got to let you go here soon, Sander. Before we do, I have one final question for you. When I was doing my research on you, I saw that you mentioned something about building an intergalactic financial system. What does that actually mean in practice, and what do you think that would actually look like?
I'm 28 today, and I'm pretty sure that in my lifetime, I'm also a big longevity fan, so I think we will at least live to be 150. So
Whoa.
in that lifetime, I think humans will not only live on the planet as we do today. I think we will either go to other planets, or we will have like capsules that fly around that basically like make us a intergalactic society. And therefore, I think we should strive for having a financial markets that also work planets to planets, and which I think Bitcoin might be the only solution we have ready to do that today.
I love that. I'm very excited to buy more Bitcoin while I'm hanging out on Mars with Elon in the not too distant future. Exciting times ahead, for sure. Sander,
Exactly.
You've got some really interesting takes. I would love to talk to you more about the 150. If I get to be 150 years old, God willing, that sounds incredible. But it sounds like you've got a lot of interesting takes, Sander, and I'm sure our audience would love to learn more about them. Is there a good handle on Twitter or X so we can follow you, or I can tell our audience to go to if they want more of your Bitcoin takes or interplanetary system, anything? What's the best place they can find you?
Yeah, Sander Andersen on X will probably be the best place to start.
Amazing. Well, Sander, I got to tell you, it's been such a pleasure having you on the show today. I really appreciate you taking the time to join us here on the Blockchain Report. Next time you have something big at FinPeers, make sure to come on the show. We'd love to talk about it. And I hope you have a great start to the rest of your week, my friend. It's Monday, so looking forward to seeing what you guys are building. And I hope you have an amazing week, my friend. Thanks again for joining us.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure is all ours.
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you, don't go!
All right, welcome back. It's time for today's deep dive. And our guest, we've got a treat for you today, as our guest is the man helping nation states orange pill faster than you can say hyper Bitcoinization. He's the CEO of Jan3, the visionary behind the Aqua Wallet, the mastermind of the Infinite Fleet universe, and one of the loudest, most relentless voices for sovereign Bitcoin adoption on the planet. From building infrastructure at Blockstream to advising El Salvador and now leading the charge toward a $1 million Bitcoin future. This guy doesn't just talk about it, he builds it. You've seen him debate Roger Ver, clap back at Charlie Lee, and now maybe even appear on HBO's Money Electric. Please give a big Blockchain Report welcome to the Bitcoin ambassador himself, SAMSON MOW. SAMSON, wow. This is quite the ovation. The crowd's loving you, and we are certainly glad to have you with us on the show today. How are you on this fine day?
I'm great, Hank. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Bitcoin's still chugging along. Things are moving in the right direction. And I got to tell you, I'm really excited to have you on the show today. I have watched many of videos of yours, and you are the man with the true signal. So we are excited to talk about you and learn more about your history and everything you're doing today. You ready to rock?
Ready. Let's do it.
All right, Samson. So let's start at the beginning, shall we? I mean, you've had an incredible career. I mean, from game development at Ubisoft to Bitcoin strategy at Blockstream, now leading Jan 3. Take us back. What first got you interested in Bitcoin?
It's not a very exciting story. I was just reading about Bitcoin. I used to consume RSS feeds voraciously, and it would pop up all the time. I think I first started reading feeds in, I don't know, like 2006 or 7. But, you know, I would just see it come up all the time, and it would always be negative news because back in the day, you know, it was always bad. Bitcoin was bad, used by bad people and doing bad things. And we've come a long way from that. But, you know, that's generally how it was framed in the media back then. And I didn't really take much of an interest in it until I came across an article talking about how to mine Bitcoin. And that kind of intrigued me. So I went through the whole setup flow and tried to set up on my laptop. I think it was 2013 maybe or 2012. And of course, I didn't mine any, but just going through that and setting everything up and running a node, that's what made me realize that Bitcoin was incredibly unique and very transformative for the world. So nothing very exciting, just curiosity and just reading a lot.
Yeah. Well, exciting or not, that seems to be the path of a lot of Bitcoiners of both past and present, right? You just educate yourself on the space, and then it's kind of hard not to orange pill yourself sometimes with all of the information that's out there about Bitcoin. I mean, you clearly see where it's headed. And as somebody who started in the video game and tech space, did that in any way shape how you approach Bitcoin adoption and infrastructure today? Because you have a really interesting background.
I would say so. So I've worked on games for quite some time. I started out at a game studio called Relic. I worked on Company of Heroes and Dawn of War, which are RTS games or real-time strategy games. And that's kind of why I built Infinite Fleet, because I wanted to make something persistent, like an MMO RTS. But working on those games, working on the online version of Company of Heroes, and building games at Ubisoft Online, that kind of made me understand really at an in-depth, detailed level of how you build these virtual worlds. And there were direct parallels to these virtual worlds with the real world, which is, as a game developer, you're controlling the economy. And you have to manage the economy, much like the Fed or any central bank does. So I think that kind of tinted my vision in a certain way, which made me more susceptible to being orange-pilled by Bitcoin. Because, you know, running a game and running an online world, balancing the economy, trying to control hyperinflation, you kind of seen behind the shroud of how a central bank is dealing with things, so to speak. And you can see the appeal of something like Bitcoin, which is decentralized, permissionless, and just functions on its own, almost like it's a living organism.
Yeah. Of those games, I'm a bit of a strategy game guy myself. Let's just say I've been playing Civilization since like the first iteration. That's my jam. Outside of your own, what's your favorite strategy game that you find yourself going to play time and again?
Well, these days I don't have that much time to play. So if I have time, I'm usually just testing Infinite Fleet, but my time is very limited these days in terms of what I can do for fun. So it's either Bitcoin or working on Infinite Fleet. That's the closest I can get to playing a game.
Fair enough. I know being an adult's just the worst, isn't it? We can't do any of the fun stuff because we have productivity to worry about and everything. So I feel you on that front. Speaking of productivity, though, you, my friend, have been a very busy guy. I mean, let's go all the way back to BTCC, all right? What was your role like there, and how did that experience prepare you for all the things you're doing now?
Well, that's a pretty big question. So BTCC was an exchange back in the day, one of the biggest in China and the world. And it grew to a massive size simply because of Mt. Gox blowing up. And everyone went to BTCC to trade. So that was kind of the origin story there. But I had to learn a lot of things jumping into it. That was my first Bitcoin job. And I had to learn about how exchanges operate and how Bitcoin worked and everything else. So there's a steep learning curve, but it was a very interesting experience because then it kind of got me sucked into the block size war because we were running a mining pool at the same time. and the politics of Bitcoin came to roost. And Gavin Andreessen and Mike Hearn were trying to contact us, telling us to upgrade to their fork of Bitcoin. So very interesting times, I would say, and a lot of learning really, really quickly.
I bet. I mean, and that took you to another stop on your journey, which of course was Blockstream, which we've had the pleasure of having Sean Bill in studio here. I know Adam we've interviewed over at the Bitcoin conference this year. And you yourself were instrumental in pushing Bitcoin infrastructure forward there. What were the most important lessons that you took from your chapter at Blockstream? Because you were there for a good bit, right?
Yeah, I think 5 years plus.
Yeah, I think that counts.
There's a number of lessons. I mean, the reason I joined Blockstream was to work on Bitcoin infrastructure. And possibly it was because of what I saw in the block size war and the demand for Bitcoin to scale. So working on technologies like Liquid, like Lightning, that would directly help Bitcoin reach billions of people around the world, I think was a very important step in my Bitcoin journey and something I think that the network needed. But also just building up more resiliency towards attacks, trying to mitigate something like the block size wars happening again, and kind of patching holes I thought were weak spots in Bitcoin's defense armor, like Block Explorer. I wanted to launch a Block Explorer because if you look back at the block size wars, most of the block explorers, which are sort of the source of truth for most people, were controlled by the opposition, the big blockers. So that was a big attack vector that I think could have swung things in their favor to control Bitcoin. But fortunately, they weren't smart enough to figure that one out. But we launched Blockstream Info, which is now an important part of the infrastructure of the Bitcoin ecosystem, and then Mempool Space launched too. So I think we're in a good place now on that front. But just getting more technology out there, letting more people take custody of their Bitcoin. We launched Blockstream Green. That was a rebrand of Green Address, which was acquired by Blockstream. We launched the Jade wallet. But a lot of things to make Bitcoin more accessible to people. I think that's the most important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, aside from education, which I guess is part of it, it does seem like the biggest hurdle that we're facing right now to real mass adoption is that accessibility and making it more user-friendly, because God knows my mother isn't going to be sending anything to her from anybody's cold wallet anytime soon. So no, I totally agree with that. And we'll get into more of that in a little bit. But right now, let's refocus and kind of talk about what you're up to now. I mean, I want to talk specifically about Jan 3. What's the core mission there? And what does accelerating hyper-Bitcoinization actually look like day to day?
So hyper-Bitcoinization, if you don't know, is the point at which you don't need to sell Bitcoin anymore. It's like the meme from The Matrix where Morpheus asks Neo, what are you going to do when Bitcoin is $1 million? Like, you don't need to sell it. Right? It's just Bitcoin everywhere. But it's really just getting more Bitcoin adoption and making it so that you can just sit in Bitcoin and live your life in Bitcoin. And I guess the broader mission is to make Bitcoin accessible too, kind of extending what I started at Blockstream, because we build on a lot of Blockstream technology. A lot of people don't appreciate this, but Blockstream's invested massive amounts of capital and resources and manpower into these scaling technologies. And at Jan 3, we're leveraging those things to build Aqua and build a super accessible wallet that anybody could use. Like your grandma can use Aqua, send and receive funds. But the goal is anybody could use Aqua and live their lives just keeping Bitcoin only and swapping out to stable coins, using a Visa card when you need to connect back to the fiat system. But that's the vision of Jan 3, just making Bitcoin ubiquitous.
Okay, well, it sounds like a good mission. We're all here for it. And you've gone a step further recently as you've been working directly on nation-state adoptions of Bitcoin, specifically with El Salvador's Bitcoin efforts. And I would love to know, how did Jan 3 get involved with that? And what role did you personally play in helping El Salvador ride the Bitcoin bandwagon?
Well, that was a connection through Jack Mallers, a friend of mine. So he was in El Salvador I think staying in El Zonte at that time, and he got those connections, and he hit me up and said, guess what? Something's going to happen here. Do you want to get Blockstream involved? And I said, yeah, of course. So we started connecting with a lot of people in the government there and advising them on a number of topics. One of which was the Bitcoin bonds, which were announced but not delivered, unfortunately. But, that was an interesting time, and I still think there's a lot of potential for countries to adopt Bitcoin in a big way.
Oh, absolutely. And I got to imagine, after having your name associated with helping El Salvador, are there other conversations happening right now with other countries or governments that are interested in Bitcoin? Maybe you can't mention any specifics, but what is it kind of feeling like around the old country government water cooler right now?
Well, there's always been interest, and it waxes and wanes kind of with Bitcoin price and what's happening in Bitcoin. Every time the crypto space has a blow up like Terra Luna or FTX, that dampens a lot of our efforts because, Bitcoin becomes an unapproachable and undiscussable topic. So this is why it's important to spread also the message of Bitcoin only, because when you're playing with crypto, you're playing with fire, and these things usually don't end very well. But yeah, it does change from time to time based on market situation, but generally there is a lot of interest still. But we've shifted our strategy at Jan3 a lot over the past, I would say, year and a half, to focus less on just engaging at a high level and bringing the theory of why Bitcoin adoption will benefit a country, but more focus on executing and starting small projects with governments to make sure that something's actually happening. Because what we found is a lot of governments are keen to meet and talk about it and possibly announce something, but then things drop off and nothing happens. So we're trying more to do less announcy things and meetings and actual projects, get things greenlit, small pilot projects, sandboxes, and things like that that will bring real adoption on the ground.
Well, that's what we love to hear, people actually doing things and not just talking about them. And with that kind of being said, this most recent cycle, we've seen this surge of institutional adopters. Obviously, this corporate Bitcoin treasury thing is all over the place. Do you feel like nation state adoption will be the next big driver for Bitcoin's price going forward? Because it seems like that's where things are slowly headed, but I feel like everyone's kind of waiting on permission, so to speak, from the United States to act first before we really see it in mass and not just in countries like El Salvador. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, this has always been a big challenge with nation state adoption, which is countries, governments move very slowly. There's a ton of red tape. I mean, if you've ever tried to renew your driver's license, you kind of get the sense of that, right? But it's like,
I got to do it at the end of the month.
yeah, they want to do something, but it's not easy to do it. Even at the city level, it can be very challenging. So a friend of mine, Ken Sim, the mayor of Vancouver, has been pushing forward a proposal to have the city of Vancouver adopt Bitcoin as a reserve asset. But he's thinking that might be years away through going through committees and analysis and research and getting approvals all up and down the food chain. So it's not a simple thing unless you have control over the legislature, which most countries, that is not really a thing for the president or prime minister to have. There's a lot of discourse, a lot of consensus building, and again, a lot of red tape. So I think it's still possible that countries can adopt a reserve. It might be that they're waiting for the US and the Trump admin to do something, but I think smaller, more agile countries could potentially move faster. So we might see another Bitcoin treasury pop up. I think Pakistan has announced that they are setting something up, but maybe a few more. But we're actively pushing for that. But again, we're not pinning all of our efforts on that and our hopes on that, but rather starting with real projects to actually have on-the-ground adoption, and then maybe the reserves come as a secondary thing.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense, and it's kind of like how like a smaller tech company is a little bit more nimble and able to make things happen faster than a big conglomerate like a Google or an Amazon, just because of that size actually does benefit them. So I think you're right. We probably will see these smaller countries join first, and then United States eventually, if Cynthia Lummis has anything to do about it. But you talked about building actual products, which is a great segue into what I want to talk about now, which is Aqua. Tell us a little bit about Aqua. How is it different from the other Bitcoin wallets, and why did you decide to build it in the first place? What was the impetus for that?
Well, Aqua is just a wallet I want to use myself, and I want it to exist.
There you go.
I think that's probably the most important thing. That if you're building a product, you have to be very passionate about that product, and it should have a higher level purpose than just being a simple thing that exists on the market. It should have a goal. So Aqua's goal is to support our efforts at Jan3 to increase Bitcoin adoption around the world. So we need a wallet that anybody can use and offers a ton of utility. Because if our goal, like we've stated before, our goal is to onboard the next billion people to Bitcoin. And you can't just say, use Bitcoin. Bitcoin's great. You have to give them a wallet, services, tools in there that just make it indispensable. So when we think of Aqua, we're kind of thinking, what do we need there? We need ways to interact with the legacy system. We need a low barrier of entry so that the unbanked can access it, because that's probably a good portion of the next billion that will use Bitcoin out of necessity. So we have to find ways that we can onboard a lot of people and give them something that they just need in their daily lives. Like, the dream for me is that people don't think of Aqua as a Bitcoin wallet. It's just how they access the financial system, how they manage their savings, how they're spending money, how they're saving money, and paying their bills. It's just something in their day-to-day lives.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that Aqua was built to onboard the next generation of Bitcoin users. So that makes me wonder, what are some of the biggest bottlenecks preventing that mass adoption of Bitcoin in like emerging markets, for instance? And how is Jan3 working to actually solve those problems for the future?
Well, one thing is the most Bitcoin wallets, you kind of asked this earlier, but how's it differ from other Bitcoin wallets? And I think our biggest differentiator is that we support Tether natively. Tether is issued on Liquid natively too. So we're the only Bitcoin wallet that kind of puts Tether, a stablecoin, front and center in front of people. And I think this is sort of our Trojan horse to get into the unbanked markets of the world, LATAM, Africa, basically any region underserved. They're using Tether, and they're seeking Tether because they look for a digital dollar, a way to access dollar value. And I think most Bitcoin wallets don't really have that. They might have some way to kind of construct an artificial dollar, but they're not tapping into the network effects of Tether. I think they're at somewhere at 400 to 500 million users in the world today. And so far, it feels like we're the only Bitcoin wallet that's embraced that and said, well, we should get those people into a more Bitcoin-focused wallet, because a lot of them are probably using an altcoin wallet because altcoins have embraced Tether, but not so much Bitcoin wallets. But I think that's changing now. But we're probably the first to really say, we're a Bitcoin and Tether wallet. And we have a large user base in LATAM, in Argentina and Brazil. I think it's just because of that. We offer people what they want, and we're not forcing them to just use a Bitcoin Lightning wallet and just adopt Bitcoin standard immediately, but we're willing to meet them where they are, and that is, they want dollars. Well, you can have dollars in Aqua, and then you can swap them to Bitcoin, and then you can use the Aqua wallet to send to a hardware wallet, but we're using that to onboard them to Bitcoin.
Interesting. Well, I love that you literally built that because you were like, this is something that I would want. And if you would want it, clearly there's a lot of other people out there that are looking for the same benefit that the Aqua wallet provides. So kudos to you. But it does make me wonder, like, how do you measure success with the wallet or at Jan3? Like, is it adoption metrics? Is it wallet usage? Government partnerships? Is there something else? How do you know that you're moving the needle?
Well, we haven't really pushed Aqua yet, so everything that we've accomplished so far is organic. and
Wow.
we've kind of been lucky. Like we've got 80,000, almost 90,000 downloads just organically, and we crossed 160 million in swap volume. So we let you swap different assets in Aqua from USDT to liquid Bitcoin to Bitcoin, and stable coins across other stable coins. So all of that adds up to about 160 million so far, and that's all organic.
Wow.
Our next big push is a big UI refresh and localization. So we kind of did a little bit of localization, but we stopped to focus on other features. But once we get the new UI and localization done, then I think we're going to really aggressively market that. But to answer your question, it is usage and users. We want to be the first Bitcoin wallet to get to, you know, a billion users, if possible. But maybe
Yeah.
it is.
You guys got to partner up with Mr. Beast. He'll get his billion followers. You get a billion users. It sounds like a great episode just waiting to happen. I'll give him a call after this.
Yeah, send me his
now I also
send me his
wanna talk-
contact.
His contact info. I got you. No problem. You've also been in the past a pretty harsh critic on fiat. I believe you've even said that it fails spectacularly. So it begs the question, are there any countries right now on your radar that you think are on the brink of bad times right now? I mean, I know you mentioned Pakistan's looking at doing a Bitcoin reserve, but are there any countries whose fiat just isn't doing the trick right now that you're like, watch over there?
I mean, Argentina, Turkey, there are many countries that seem on the brink of fiat collapse. And I think they're still hanging on. Even the US is not looking that great right now. And I think that
Right.
that is driving a lot of the initiatives right now. If you look at the US, they're embracing stablecoins because they have to. There's no other choice. Like nobody's buying their US treasuries. Like Tether, I think, is the top 15, a top 15 holder up there above many countries because there is no more demand. Wow. So if you look at where things are going, like fiat is definitely on its last legs, and it's possibly a few years away, maybe 5, maybe 10. Nobody knows for sure, but it's definitely not on an upward growth trajectory.
Yeah, no, it certainly doesn't seem like that. And it makes me wonder, as someone who's really got their hand on the pulse, is there like a dark horse nation out there that you think will surprise people by kind of going El Salvadorian in their Bitcoin adoption next? I know we talked about Pakistan, but is there anybody else who's a little off the radar that you wouldn't be surprised if they came out and said tomorrow, hey, we're adopting a Bitcoin standard?
Let me think. I would say yes, but it's subject to the same challenges. Like it's difficult for a country to just pull an El Salvador and say we're doing this because they'd be discussing it in advance and they would need to pass legislation, right? Like Cynthia Lummis's Bitcoin Act is still kind of in flux. It's still not moved forward yet. But it's difficult for any country to do that. But then there are countries that can do that because the president or prime minister has unilateral control. So I don't rule it out, but I would say it's hard to get a surprise like El Salvador.
Yeah, no, I think you're probably right. I just figure you're probably in a bunch of backroom meetings I'm not ever even knowing are going on. So maybe you had an inside scoop, but I wouldn't blame you if you didn't want to share it with us on the show today. That's okay. With this all being said, though, do you think we'll ever see a government itself issue sovereign debt specifically to buy Bitcoin? Is that not too far off in the future, or is that just no one's even thinking about that right now?
You'd think it's a no-brainer, and that anyone with fiat money would just do that. But, I think they would need to first make that foray into Bitcoin and set up a treasury. Like even setting up a reserve, a treasury is a big challenge because the question is who holds the keys? Is it with a custodian? Is it with some multi-sig setup in the country? And that is like a big blocker in and of itself. So I think once you have that hurdle cleared, then it opens up the possibility of let's just print the fiat and buy Bitcoin. But I think to reach that stage as a government, you have to already have decided like fiat is over. And to get there, you have to really understand Bitcoin at a fundamental level and deep level. So I think we're a ways away, even though for us as Bitcoiners, it's a no-brainer. And if we had access to a infinite money printing machine, we'd be doing that already. I mean, you could argue that Sailor's already doing that with strategy.
Yeah. I think we just need to start sending all of the politicians out there. Have you seen the God Bless Bitcoin movie that came out like last year?
I have not.
Okay. I mean, you already know everything that's in there, but boy, is it a really great and informative watch for anybody who's kind of dipping their toes in the orange pond, so to speak, because it really, I mean, it has so many great people like, of your ilk, so to speak, talking about Bitcoin, and Mark Cuban's in it. It's just a who's who of people in the industry. Michael Saylor's got a whole bunch of parts in it. But it goes on to explain why Bitcoin's important, why we need it. So it's like, if anybody can tell me they don't believe in it after seeing that, well, then I think you belong in some kind of institution. It makes a good case. It's a good flick. I want to switch gears a little bit, Sam. Oh, go ahead, please.
Oh, I was just going to add, like, in this day and age, there's just so much information. You have documentaries, you have movies, you have, I don't know, hundreds of books now about Bitcoin. It's just so easy to learn if you're willing to learn compared to back when I learned about Bitcoin, where there was very little information. There's no podcast, like maybe one, but it's kind of like when Andreas Antonopoulos was talking to an empty room. That was what it was like back then. So if you are alive today and you know about Bitcoin and you haven't learned about Bitcoin, it's almost all on you. There's no one to blame when hyper-Bitcoinization hits and you missed it because you didn't choose to learn a little bit more.
Yeah, we're entering what, year 16, right, of it? And if you've still chosen to keep your head in the sand, well, that's kind of on you, fam. So we can only do so much. You can lead a horse, right? And in this most recent cycle, it's been particularly interesting, right? We've seen Bitcoin hit new all-time highs. In fact, when it reached over 110K, I believe you tweeted something to the effect of 0.112 M isn't interesting in terms of the Bitcoin price, which makes me ask, what is an interesting Bitcoin price to you right now, Samson? And what kind of number are we going to need to see till it actually gets your full attention?
I think maybe 0.25. But definitely 0.5 M. That is where it really starts getting interesting. I think at 0.5, we've reached half of gold. So that's when the train accelerates. So nothing stops the train, but the train accelerates at 0.5. That's when you start massive demonetization of gold, real estate, and everything else, and it just gets sucked into Bitcoin. But I think it all happens very quickly because once you hit 0.25, 0.5 is not far away, and then 1 is not far away.
You've mentioned in your predictions, you've said that Bitcoin will hit 1 million. I've heard many a times. And you've gone on record saying that it'll happen seemingly like a sudden violent explosion. How much of a time frame does that mean to you? And why do you think it will be all of the sudden? Is it one of those situations where things happen gradually until they happen suddenly and will reach kind of an inflection point? Or do you expect a huge catalyst like nation state adoption happen and then all of a sudden we're off to the races?
I think it's all of what you just said there. It is gradually and then suddenly. And nobody knows exactly when suddenly hits, but you can definitely see the suddenly on the horizon with everything that's happening. I mean, ETFs alone are buying multiple times the mine supply of Bitcoin. Then you factor in the corporate adoption, which is accelerating.
Right.
Like, strategy is not buying less, they're buying more, and they're raising more every time. I think STRC upsized from $500 million to 2.5 billion. Metaplanet is increasing the velocity and size of their buys, and then you have new entrants coming in too. Adam Back has announced a BSTR with, I think, 30,000 coins committed. So nothing is slowing down. Everything is speeding up. So 1 million doesn't seem like it's a far away thing. There are a lot of people that theorize that, post-institutional adoption, we're seeing less volatility. It's going to be a slow slog. But I just don't see that. Not with the velocity of the buying that's happening on the market. Even 80,000 coins dropped on Sunday night barely made a dent. Like Bitcoin is numb to all of this
Right.
now. It's just going up.
Yeah. And this has been a really interesting cycle compared to ones of the past, right? Because we haven't seen much of anything from retail this time. And I remember the last cycle, it felt like it was almost entirely retail driven. You'd go on TikTok, there'd be a million influencers pumping up price predictions for this, that, and the other. But they seem absent this time around, and it seems to be mostly institutional. Why do you think retail is sitting on the sidelines this go around?
I don't know. It could be that retail's out of cash. Like I think most people don't factor in that the economy of most countries in the world right now are not in a good state. And it could just be that retail is broke. And it's going to be institutional capital. It's going to be investors rotating out of other things like real estate and gold into Bitcoin. Or it's going to be pension funds that need to cover unfunded liabilities buying strategy or a strategy product. So maybe that's the thing. I'm not really sure, but I would just add a caveat that right now I would say we're overheated because you can see alts started to outperform Bitcoin temporarily. And in my recollection and experience, that's never a good thing. Usually we come back down, and then when Bitcoin dominance goes up, then we go back up again in a more healthy manner.
Right. So right now, does it feel like to you that maybe the Bitcoin price is getting a little frothy and we're finally starting to see some people in the space take their gains and they maybe put those into what they might consider high alpha plays, like Ethereum has woken up finally, XRP's been surging the last month. Do you think we might be at the start of a quote unquote altcoin rally based on what we've seen in previous cycles?
I mean, there are always altcoin rallies and then they always fizzle out. If you look at the history of crypto, it's like everything goes down over time. Nothing sustains. And that includes things like Ethereum. But you know, they're so small now relative to Bitcoin and so illiquid relative to Bitcoin that it is easy for people to pump them up. And that's maybe where the retail money is going because they see quick gains and then they're buying an alt. And then the alt drops and they get flushed out. And that cycle repeats over and over. That's why I think it's healthier if we go down a bit. Even Bitcoin goes down a little bit, flush out the alts, increase dominance, and then go up in a more healthy fashion.
Right. What do you feel like it's going to take for retail to really get their head back in the Bitcoin game? Because right now, because part of me feels like the reason we haven't seen much from retail this go around is unit bias, right? People are feeling like, especially if they're not particularly knowledgeable in the space, 120K, I can't afford a whole Bitcoin. Yet I can buy a Bitcoin to like the 8th decimal point, right? And if you told many traditional finance advisors, like, hey, I got something that accumulates at about 30% a year, they'd say, put all of your money in that right now. But for some reason, it seems like nobody wants to hop in on the Bitcoin bandwagon aside from institutions. Do you think maybe we need a price point so high for Bitcoin that people see 0.1 and be like, oh, that's worth getting? Or like, I feel like it's a psychological reason that retail isn't playing ball this go around. Does that make sense? Or do you maybe think it's just something else entirely? And
no, it makes sense. I don't think we've reached FOMO territory yet. And again, 0.25, 0.5, those are my interesting targets. But I did a calculation a few weeks back about the cost of eggs and inflation. And if you look at eggs alone, the real rate of inflation is something like 11%. And if you factor that in with our 2021 highs, adjusted for inflation, you know, that's like 100K. So we're just kind of beating inflation right now, real inflation. And real inflation probably higher than 11%. Like that's just arbitrarily picking eggs as a baseline. But, you know, that's not FOMO territory. FOMO territory is really outpacing inflation. And I think people will subconsciously know that when we get to, you know, 0.2, 0.25. And then they're going to wake up and go, okay, well, I need to get into this now because it's meaningful now. but maybe subconsciously the
Right.
market just knows we're more or less tracking inflation.
Interesting. That's a good point. I would be interested in looking more into that, but that makes a lot of sense. And, you know, a big part of the reason the price of Bitcoin this cycle, we're in the 120s, right? We can't ignore is the ETF that we've been seeing, right? Left and right, IBIT. Do you feel like these are good or bad for Bitcoin adoption? Like, what's your take on Bitcoin ETFs and institutional involvement overall? Is this a necessary step forward, or is this a Trojan horse that threatens Bitcoin's fundamentals over the long run?
Well, there's mixed views on this, and it's a very complicated topic because when people are holding funds in ETF, it's obviously suboptimal to holding Bitcoin on your own wallet, which is actually far easier to do to use Bitcoin as a bearer asset than, say, gold. And you know, I'm conflicted too. Like I see the value in ETFs because it gives ordinary people access to Bitcoin, and they don't need to go through the challenges of learning self-custody, even though we as Bitcoiners don't think it's a hard thing. But conceptually, for a normal person that's never touched a crypto asset, you know, having complete responsibility is a scary thing, believe it or not. So ETFs eliminate that, but ETFs also act as a portal to TradFi money. And I've said this like numerous times over the past few years since ETFs were approved, but there is no more barrier to capital inflow to Bitcoin. You can look at jan3.com/charts. We have a number of charts on ETF flows, but you know, inflows are predominant, as we know, and there is no barrier. So in past bull runs, you would see like Coinbase goes down or something, or exchanges are backlogged, like Kraken, Bitfinex, they can't KYC fast enough, and then the bull run tapers off. But that's not the case anymore. Like you have, everyone has a brokerage account, or most people have a brokerage account in the Western world, and they can simply buy, and you eliminate that need to onboard at an exchange. So that's a huge thing. But moreover, having that portal to TradFi money means pension funds, institutional capital, those can all flow directly into Bitcoin unhindered. And that is a big thing. Like if you tell a pension fund, similar to we're talking about nation states, you know, buy Bitcoin and hold it. The first question is, can we? Can we get the approvals? Can we get sign off? Can we change our charter? But then second is, how do we hold it? Like, is someone going to set up a Blockstream Jade and keep it there, or set up a multi-sig? There are a lot of complexities, just like with the country, on how to hold a bearer asset, and especially something like Bitcoin. So having the option to just buy IBIT or FBTC or what's Bitwise is, you know, it just changes the whole game, and there is no more barrier to entry.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it every day. More and more of these things are coming up. IBIT's, I think, the fastest growing ETF in history, like wild times. But in addition to the ETF inflows, we're also seeing all of these companies issue preferred shares or raise capital specifically to buy Bitcoin. Is that becoming the new playbook for corporate treasuries? And if so, does that worry you for companies not named Strategy? Because I'd love to get your thoughts on it, because it works for MicroStrategy. They've been doing it for 5-6 years, but we got a lot of new players in the space. Is this sustainable for everybody?
I would say so. I mean, Strategy has shown us that there is a glitch in the matrix, and you can get infinite money. Basically, that's what it is. Zero interest loans are infinite money. So as more companies find these kind of glitches, they'll tap into them. Metaplanet's another example. It's partially regulatory based, because buying spot is punitive. So people will just buy Strategy for exposure. Buy Metaplanet for exposure. So I think there are different glitches in different regions and jurisdictions that let companies tap into this money glitch. And that is good for Bitcoin because it accelerates hyper-Bitcoinization. It accelerates the global wealth that is flowing into Bitcoin.
And as we're in this period of time where we're seeing ETFs, we're seeing Bitcoin corporate treasuries, do you think that there's any real risk that Bitcoin could be absorbed or controlled by the hands of traditional finance? Or are maximalists still winning the fight for Bitcoin's future right now?
Well, that's an interesting topic, Hank. Like, I think it was like a year or 2 years ago, I forgot now, but I tweeted about Bitcoin being split, bifurcated into, approved Bitcoin, the Bitcoin that's in ETFs and in funds, versus free Bitcoin, which is the self-custodied, freely circulating Bitcoin outside of the control of institutions. And I think that possibility is still there. We'll see how it plays out for sure. But I don't see Bitcoin possibly being captured because Bitcoin will always exist outside the system. Bitcoin within the system, within the financial system, is an arbitrary construct. But the natural state of Bitcoin is free flowing outside of anyone's control. And I don't think that will change at any time. You might have a good portion of Bitcoin locked up in ETFs and whatnot, or in nation state treasuries, but you also have a good portion not in treasuries. So I don't see it as an existential risk. There could be this separation in the future, but then you'll just have two different prices for Bitcoin, just like Argentina has two different prices for the dollar blue, and then the official dollar rate.
Right. Interesting take. I like that. But there are a lot of pundits out there, right, that still say to this day that Bitcoin's volatility makes it unfit as a reserve asset to begin with. How do you respond to that right now? I mean, and do you think that argument still holds water, or with each passing day, especially during this cycle, are we seeing Bitcoin's volatility kind of get muted quite a bit? Because that's kind of how it's feeling right now.
I would say so. I mean, 80,000 coins dumped on the weekend spot.
Yeah.
It barely made a dent. And I think that is the most poignant example of reduced volatility. Like in past years, let's go back 4 or 5 years, that would have significantly dropped Bitcoin, at least temporarily. But now it's almost like Bitcoin's numb. There's nothing. It's like, yeah, drop 80K, drop 100K, maybe 500K. Nothing will happen. It'll just dip down a little bit, but the buy pressure is just massive and sustained. Like every corporation with a Bitcoin strategy is buying at that depressed price, and it just scoops it all up.
Yeah, do you feel like the lack of volatility we saw during this recent 80,000 coin price dump is a pretty clear signal of that we are fully in the maturation process of Bitcoin as an asset? Because like you said, back in the day, that would have been a 20% drop overnight. Now it went down to, I think, to just around 115. We're already back up to 118 in a couple of days. So to you, is that we're moving in the right direction? Is that how that kind of is feeling right now?
Well, it's not about the right or wrong direction. This is just an inevitability. As Bitcoin becomes the new world reserve asset, the price will go up. It'll go to 1 million. It'll go to 10, and then it'll reach dollar sat parity. And probably before that happens, we hit a terminus point where, you stop pricing things in dollars because it doesn't make sense anymore. And there's tons of historical examples of this, right? Like fast failure of fiat currencies is the norm. It's not the exception. Look at the German mark, right? That's fast fail. Every fiat currency fast fails. It doesn't fail over 50 to 100 years, except for maybe the dollar. It's failed over 100 years, but it's coming to a close. But as it increases in value, then of course you see less volatility because it takes more to make a dent. If you go back to, I think last year, right, the Saxony government in Germany, they dumped 50,000. And that made a bigger impact than the 80,000. So you can already see in a very short time frame a far more muted effect of coins being dropped.
Yeah, no, you make great points, and those are all very real world cases that we are seeing it in real time. But despite that, the resiliency that we've seen from Bitcoin's price, especially as of late, we're still seeing a lot of big players not interested in Bitcoin right now. In fact, you've called out Wikipedia for rejecting Bitcoin donations in the past. Why do you think major institutions why are some of them still hesitating to hold Bitcoin despite all the upside that we see and have been seeing over the last couple of months?
It's a direct parallel of, why do ordinary people, why does your neighbor not want to learn about Bitcoin? Because there's a cognitive load. Like, you are living your life, you're doing your job, doing your errands, buying groceries, you go home, you watch Netflix. Like, where in your normie life do you fit in listening to a podcast with Sailor, right? Like, it's something new they have to introduce. Or if you're willing to listen to the podcast, making that first step and buying Bitcoin has a barrier too, because now you have to register on some exchange or some platform, you have to send money. But there are things you have to do to get into Bitcoin. And it sounds really stupid, but that inertia it's like daunting for a lot of people. And that applies to corporations as well. So if you remember, I think last year, Sailor delivered a great message to Microsoft when they were tabling the issue of adding Bitcoin to their reserve, adding Bitcoin reserves. And, they voted against it. So, why is that? I think it's because it's the same thing. They have their business model. They have, multi-billion-dollar acquisitions on the table. They have a ton of things. Where in their schedule are they going to figure out how to buy Bitcoin, find a custodian, probably they'll use a custodian, vet the custodian, and execute a strategy? Like, it's a distraction to them, unfortunately, for better or for worse. And that is really what's holding everyone back. But when we hit that 0.25, 0.5 M mark, I think that changes. It suddenly becomes not a distraction, but a necessity. And if you, again, look at history, people like to do things when it's necessary, not when it's optional.
That's a great point. So it's kind of like we're just waiting for that inflection point where these doubters, Bitcoin just becomes too big to ignore for them, and they have to consider it, because if they don't, they're going to be left the way of the dinosaurs. And with how quickly corporations are snatching up BTC right now, that might be happening a lot sooner than later for a lot of these companies, unfortunately. But like you said, it's kind of their fault for keeping their head in the sand. So sorry, guys. I want to kind of look ahead now to the rest of this year, 2025. This has been an incredibly exciting year in the Bitcoin ecosystem. As we look forward to the second half, what's the most exciting or underappreciated trend in Bitcoin that more people should be paying attention to right now?
I mean, I think it's just the corporate adoption. And I think corporate adoption will lead to nation state adoption, because every massive success story in a country of some company holding Bitcoin makes Bitcoin undeniable, and the government can't ignore it. So let's just take Japan as an example. We've been engaging politicians in Japan and a lot of agencies. Like, we met with the Bank of Japan, FSA, and everybody over the course of a few years, again and again, like multiple visits. And nothing seems to move. But with Metaplanet's dominance in the Japanese market, it just becomes unignorable. Like, how can you ignore something that size and growing at that rate and dominating volume and volatility? You can't. So the conversations have actually softened, and it's actually getting easier and easier to have these discussions. But again, you're fighting a bureaucracy. So you have to contend with that. But definitely, as you see more corporate adoption, I think you're going to see more nation state adoption. It just paves the way.
Yeah, I think they kind of go hand in hand. One doing it kind of validates it a little bit to the other. If all these big companies are doing it, I've got to imagine it becomes a lot more palatable for sovereign nations, to be like, oh, maybe we should consider this too. That's kind of, I think, what we thought when Tesla put it on their balance sheets back in, that was like 2021. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the moment. Turns out that wasn't quite the case, but it was another building block to get us where we are today in this process of so-called hyper-Bitcoinization. And you've talked about it, and we talked about it a little bit earlier. Do you really think that's something that's going to happen gradually, and then suddenly, like, we'll get some kind of black swan type of event that's going to cause it to happen overnight? Or will it likely play out in uneven increments over like a 10-year period, and then 10 years from now, I'm buying my Starbucks with Bitcoin? Like, how do you really see that playing out in the next 5 to 10?
I think it is very sudden. And that's the thesis of the Omega candle, that we just start seeing 100K candles daily. And I don't think it's far away. And I would say this is more of an orange swan than a black swan. But all signs point to the orange swan coming. It's like flying closer and closer, and it's about to land. And when it does, you're going to feel it.
Oh my God, Samson, you just dropped the amazing Game of Thrones line I never knew I needed. Orange Swan cometh. I love it. That is fun. All right, so we got to wrap things up for you, Samson. I know you got to get out of here. Before we do, though, you have predicted $1 million of Bitcoin. I've heard it many a times. Realistically, by the end of this year, are we going to be seeing that $1 million Bitcoin? Or what do you think? What is your prediction for the end of this year? If you had to, this is not financial advice. I'm just curious as a man with his ear to the ground and knows what's going on. What do you think we sit at by the end of 2025?
It's hard to say. All I'm going to say is Omega is coming. I think you're just going to see it happen, and it's going to happen faster than most people believe. It feels like the general consensus is volatility is muted. We're going to see a steady slog upwards, but Bitcoin just likes to shock and awe us. So I think, if anything, we're going to see 1 million faster than anyone thinks it's going to happen. Like most models, Saylor's 24 model, Bitcoin 24 model, I think puts it out in 2030 something. He recently said in Prague in his presentation, 21 million in 21 years. And, that means we're going up, 1 million a year, right? So it's to be seen, but I think all signs point to sooner rather than later. So it's better to be prepared mentally that, it is coming, and treat your Bitcoin with that care and attention and secure it and plan accordingly.
I agree, and I'll tell you this, if it hits 1 million this year, you better prepare for me to pick you up in one of my brand new helicopters, because that's what's happening if we reach 1 million by the end of December. All right, Samson, before we let you go, I'm sure there's a lot of people in our audience that are looking to learn more about you and all the amazing stuff you're doing over at Jan3. What would be the best place for me to send them to get more info?
We're on X, Jan3com. Aqua's at Aqua Wallet, Aqua Bitcoin. And my handle is Excelion, Excelllion. But the best way to reach out is actually the contact form on Jan3, because there's like 3 or 4 people that monitor that. If you DM me, it's not going to reach me, likely.
Well, that's good to know. I'll be having the team DM you for when we get you back on next. But Samson, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. It's so great to hear from your insight and expertise in the space. And we thank you so much for taking the time with us today. And we would love to have you back on at some point, because you were just a blast. Thank you for today.
Awesome. Thanks, Hank. Take care.
Thanks, Samson. You as well. All right, we're back with our deep dive with Ben Werkman, the CIO at Swan Bitcoin. Ben, I want to talk a little bit about your new role or newer role at Swan as the CIO. What's the big mission you're aiming to drive forward from your new seat at the table?
We're focused solely on Bitcoin adoption, and whether that comes through our retail customers or whether that comes through our more than 2,000 business customers, this is something we think is very important to a lot of people's future. And me coming on really helps us expand that focus into the corporate treasury space. And so most of my time is going to be spent helping these corporations adopt it, helping them implement the playbook and put the right risk controls in place to make sure that as they're building their treasury and they're changing their focus for where they're creating shareholder value, that they're doing so responsibly and in a very controlled manner, but also helping communicate that message out into the market. This is a rather new trend. Even though MicroStrategy's been at this, for more than 5 years, a lot of people are still hearing about this for the first time, and they will initially think that it's a very risky thing that's happening in the market because they hear that word leverage, and the word leverage scares people. But really, these companies are very underlevered. A lot of the actual capital raising is being done through equity. You don't see any large overlevered companies out there in the market right now. So it's being done in a very controlled manner at the moment. So, our mission at Swan is to be able to help accelerate that journey for both our retail customers and for our corporate customers, and help people to understand what is happening and what is the value that Bitcoin brings to their portfolio, whether it's on their personal balance sheet or their corporate balance sheet.
Yeah, and you actually helped, you mentioned leverage, you helped create Swan's Leveraged Bitcoin Equity Guide, right? Like, what are the LBEs in plain English, and why should investors care?
Yeah, I did. So there was a lot of questions that were out there when companies are deploying these, because it's a very different way to think. It takes the focus off of the income statement until recently, when people are now getting their eyes opened by MicroStrategy's income statement, but it put a focus on deploying the assets on your balance sheet. And you're doing that through pulling many different levers. The first one is always the common stock equity. And this is what people refer to as the ATMs typically, but it can be done through many different channels where you're selling equity to investors. They're providing you capital. You're taking that capital and putting it on the balance sheet. And the investors now benefit from the long-term appreciation of that Bitcoin, but they're also capturing the arbitrage between the market value of that equity and the net asset value of the assets on the balance sheet to create value and increase Bitcoin per share. But you also saw a lot of activity in the convertible bond market early. That was one of the largest tools that helped MicroStrategy really scale as they were going through this process. And it helped open investors' eyes to the different pools of capital that have different needs. And the one they found with convertible bonds was convertible arbitrage desks. And these are people that are effectively trading the volatility between the equity and the convertible bond paper. And what happened is having a huge amount of Bitcoin on the balance sheet and creating a volatile common stock allowed them to trade in and out of their positions more frequently than they typically would be able to if they were investing with a lower volatility equity. And so that Bitcoin is really making it possible for them to pull returns in faster than they would have before. And now you're seeing the next emergence, which I think is really going to be the biggest one, which is this transition into Bitcoin-backed credit instruments. And those are being deployed via these preferred stocks that you've seen Strategy offering several of already, where they're really now targeting that, $300 trillion in fixed income out there. And what they're doing is they're bringing the benefit of high yielding products into the market, high dividend paying products that are very attractive to investors. And it's made possible by the compound annual growth rate of Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin's appreciating at 30% a year and they owe the preferred holders, 9%, the rest of that gain is going to the common stockholders. So they're really finding creative ways to drive value to their common stockholders by deploying their balance sheet in a very strategic manner. And this is something that has a steep learning curve to it, and people are finding that, but this is one of the most engaged retail investing communities I've ever seen. People are digging into this every single day. You're seeing breakdowns out there on YouTube and on X every single day, and the transparency around these companies is really reigniting investors in this space.
Yeah, and I was really excited when I knew you were coming on the show because you mentioned Strategy. They've kind of been the belle of the ball as of late, specifically with this corporate Bitcoin treasury plays that we've been seeing. I know you've studied Bitcoin treasury stocks like Strategy and Metaplanet very extensively. What do you think makes them so unique, but maybe also potentially misunderstood as we enter this new era of Bitcoin treasuries?
Yeah, Strategy and Michael Saylor are clearly the pioneers in this space. Someone has to take the risk and really define the rules of the road for everybody else to be able to follow. And that was what Saylor really did. He had to go into each of these individual markets and show that there was demand from these investors that would invest in this type of a value proposition. And he's been doing that through the equity markets, through the debt markets, now through the preferred markets. And that's making it possible for all the companies that are following in their footsteps to really be strategic about how they deploy this playbook. Metaplanet in Japan, they found a really unique opportunity, and Simon and Dylan have been capitalizing on it in a big way, where they've got a tax arbitrage over there, where it's actually better for investors in Japan to get exposure to Bitcoin through what's called their NISA accounts, because there's a tax benefit. If they're holding Bitcoin itself and trading in and out of Bitcoin, that can hit them with more than a 50% tax rate. But if they're holding a company like Metaplanet in their NISA accounts, it's down to like 20. And now you just saw them announce that they're launching perpetual preferreds in Japan. And that's a huge moment for a company like Metaplanet, because Japan has a really unique rate environment. Their rates are incredibly low. So they're yield starved. And so being able to bring a product to market that's going to offer, I believe the cap on what they're offering is about 6%. That's huge compared to, their overnight rate, which I believe is around 0.5%. So you're seeing innovation globally now in this space. It's not just contained in the US. You're seeing these Bitcoin treasury companies pop up at every market, and each of these markets has something unique to offer. But it's all made possible by Saylor really blazing the trail, taking the risk. He had to endure a bear market and show that you can come out the other side with this strategy as long as you're controlling the leverage you're putting it on your balance sheet, and you're being transparent with your investors so that they know exactly what steps you're making and why you're taking them.
Yeah, and you mentioned we're seeing these Bitcoin treasuries starting to pop up everywhere. It feels like every day we're seeing one or two new ones come into the news. How would you go about walking one of those companies through, or advising a company considering a Bitcoin strategy today? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I think there's really two very distinct paths. And quite frankly, we actually jumped over the one I thought was going to happen first. I thought initially what we would see in the Bitcoin space was companies allocating very small portions of their balance sheet to Bitcoin, more as a hedge, right? In that 1 to 5% of maybe it was just their cash and US Treasury reserves. We jumped past that because Saylor showed that there was an opportunity here in the financial engineering of products that are uniquely tailored to attract investors and onboard capital that otherwise wouldn't be able to get exposure to Bitcoin. A lot of these institutional investors by charter can't invest in Bitcoin itself. What they can invest in is equity and credit instruments. And so he opened a lot of people's eyes to the opportunity there because of how deep those pools of capital are. And so you started seeing more and more companies taking the leveraged Bitcoin equity approach to this and issuing those securities into the market to raise money to bring it into Bitcoin. But I still think that the other model is going to come back, and that's going to be one of the big catalysts. I think that the more of these spending bills we see coming out, and the more that inflation and the debt problems start getting highlighted, companies are going to start seeing that you need an alternative to opt out of that system. And right now, the only true decentralized store of value that they have immediate access to do that they can capitalize themselves on, is Bitcoin. So I think that as you continue to see the weakness in the markets and the uncertainty in the markets, more and more companies are going to look at putting that hedge on for themselves and converting portions of their balance sheet to Bitcoin. And that's going to be a movement that's really going to need to be applauded by this community. We're used to the high octane type of investments, but Bitcoin is a store of value. And that's something that's applicable to individuals, and it's applicable to businesses, and anybody that's taking the steps to protect themselves is making the right decision.
Yeah. And Ben, from your seat, I'm sure there's a lot of people in our audience right now who are are listening to what you have to say, and they're like, I like the cut of this guy's jib, but I'm not sure how or if I'm ready to invest in Bitcoin yet. What would you advise them is the smartest way to invest in Bitcoin today? Is it ETFs? Is it self-custodying it? Or is it Bitcoin stocks? Or maybe something else?
I think there's a lot of ways that people are going to start getting exposure. I think the ETFs became very simple because it feels very familiar. And when you start to see an investment, even if you allocate a small portion of money to it, it captures your attention and it makes you want to learn more about it. Now, I'm always an advocate for self-custody, and Swan's always been an advocate for self-custody, but we can also help with multi-signature custody as well for people that, want to distribute those keys, because there is a learning curve to self-custody. So I think getting any exposure right now is good, particularly whether you're getting exposure to spot Bitcoin through the Bitcoin ETFs. Maybe you're participating in some of these leveraged Bitcoin equities, but those have more of a learning curve as an investment than just spot Bitcoin itself. Getting exposure in your personal portfolio is going to lead you to go down the rabbit hole of learning more about what Bitcoin has to offer as that true decentralized bearer type asset that you have full and sovereign control over. And that's a really powerful shift in thinking when you understand that that's pulling you outside of the traditional monetary system, and it's giving you something that you truly hold yourself, that nobody can take from you. So getting any exposure helps to protect yourself from the debasement. But when you get to that journey where you start exploring self-custody, you really realize how powerful an asset like Bitcoin is. And that's when a lot of people start to find that they realize they don't have enough.
Yeah. And for those same people that are like, I don't feel like I have enough right now, which is pretty much everybody in the Bitcoin space. You can never have enough. What's your take on Bitcoin's price right now? Are we still undervalued? Are we near the top of this cycle? There's been a lot of talk that the 4-year cycles are done with, like a CIO of Bitwise, Matt Hogan, has said, I don't think we're going to be seeing the traditional 4-year cycles anymore. It's going to be just kind of a long, slow creep up and to the right. What are your thoughts on that? Is 123 the top for 2025, or do you think we're going to see another rush here in the not too distant future?
Well, I don't think we're anywhere near the top yet. And I think that Matt's right. You've also heard Michael Saylor say the same thing, right? He told everyone winter's not coming back. And he very well may be correct. You got to realize that with all these corporations coming in, you've got a different type of buyer in the market now. The past several cycles were really guided by traders and venture capital that was trading in the market. And so when you would start to see these high leverage plays being put on, they would hit liquidations. You'd get the cascading liquidations. It would impact the price of Bitcoin in a very big way. What you're starting to see now when you have companies like Strategy and MetaPlanet and Saquons that are out here who are putting in a treasury strategy that's only directionally long. These are not traders. They're accumulating Bitcoin. That Bitcoin's going on the balance sheet, and that's where it's staying. You're building a new type of structural bid underneath Bitcoin. There's always buyers underneath it now. And I think it's a matter of time before sellers at these levels get exhausted and the price has to move up to find where that next tranche of sellers is going to come from. So I do think that we have a structurally different market around Bitcoin. And, seeing it drop from 123 down to the 115 range, if you've been in Bitcoin long enough, you learn to expect periods of volatility. But the volatility has actually been dampened over time as we've seen more and more buyers coming into the space. So I think that eventually that demand is going to overwhelm the supply. And Bitcoin with a truly fixed supply, the only thing that can give is going to be the price. And I think we're going to see a repricing much, much higher.
Yeah, no, I'd have to agree with you. I think structurally we're in a completely different era during like Bitcoin's maturation process with all these big companies jumping on board, and we're no longer driven by retail traders that are trying to, carve profits off of frothy prices and, do these day trades. But with the treasuries, it does beg the question. We haven't seen this before. And aside from MicroStrategy, as you pointed out earlier, we haven't really seen many of these treasury companies and how they will react or survive a quote unquote bear market if we see one of those again, given the traditional cycles we've seen in the past. How do you see that playing out? Do you think maybe some weaker hands might be over leveraged and then they could sell off? Could that cause a domino effect for companies that didn't buy in as early as MicroStrategy? Does that concern you at all as we go forward and kind of figure out this new phase of Bitcoin's maturation process?
It really doesn't concern me because I think there's been a huge amount of education that's happened over the past several years. You've got the learnings that came from a company like MicroStrategy that did have to survive a bear, and a pretty brutal one. You had a lot of bad actors in the market at the time that were putting a huge amount of selling pressure as they were unwinding. And Strategy had to survive and come out the other side on that. And they had instruments that weren't as resilient as the ones that they have now during the time. You used to see things like fixed debt or fixed term secured debt on the balance sheet, which is something that a lot of these companies now want to avoid because you don't want to give up control in terms of how you execute. You don't want to put yourself in a position where you can be liquidated. So most of these companies are now opting for non-recourse debt. And that means that Bitcoin can draw down, but you're not at risk of being liquidated at any point. So I think that there's a lot more conviction out there with the executives that are implementing this playbook, and they're implementing it responsibly so that you're building a resilient business model that can survive through bear markets. Now, whether we see a significant bear market is completely up for debate right now. But the other thing that I would point out is people think that this market is significantly larger than it is. You know, you've got really one true player of scale out there, which is strategy, and everyone has seen, and sailors communicated very well, just how resilient they are at this stage. But all the other ones are very small in size. So if one or two of these companies do decide to get levered and maybe they take on secured term debt and they have a liquidation event, you've still got the structural buyers from all these other companies that are deploying it responsibly. And most of these other companies are still very small in scale. And the ones that achieve scale, I believe, are going to do it responsibly because they want to attract institutional capital. And in order to attract institutional capital, you have to have robust risk frameworks. You have to constantly be evaluating and stress testing your model to make sure that you're ready for whatever the market throws at you.
Yeah, well put, well put. Now, Ben, there's so much more I'd love to ask you, but I know you got to get going. Before we let you go today, if people in our audience are like, hey, I really like what Ben has to say, and I'd like to know more about what Swan Bitcoin does, what's the best place that I can send them to get more information?
Absolutely. To find me, it's just at Ben Workman on Twitter. I'm pretty easy to find. And for everyone else, you should go to swan.com and you can reach out. We've got a Deep Swan private team that's there and ready to help people on their Bitcoin journey.
Amazing. Well, Ben, thank you so much for your time today. It was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And we hope to have you on again sometime. And I hope you have a great weekend, my friend.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hank. It was my pleasure.
Well, that's a wrap for today's show, boys and girls. As always, thanks for tuning in to the Blockchain Report. And if you haven't already, do yourself and me a little favor and make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to RoxomTV and me at Hank at RoxomTV, wherever you choose to doom scroll. And we'll be back tomorrow with more Bitcoin Bedlam right here on the Blockchain Report. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, and as always, hodl on.
Security matters. Zappo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
In a world far away. Nah, just kidding. This story begins in this world. It all started in 1460 in Antwerp, when the first commodities exchange was created, but the real transformation came in 1602, when the Amsterdam Stock Exchange was founded. Considered the oldest in the world, it was the first to trade financial assets. Over the years, Britain expanded its colonial and maritime influence, and the British pound sterling overtook the Dutch guilder in the market. Thus, the London Stock Exchange became the financial centre of the world. The 20th century came, and the world got into some trouble. But shortly after World War II, the Bretton Woods Agreement established the dollar as the world's primary reserve currency, and the centre of the planet moved to Wall Street. Today, we're travelling at the speed of light towards a new age, an era shaped by the consolidation of Bitcoin as the currency that will define the future of the markets. We present Roxom, a new Bitcoin-denominated market that allows trading all sorts of securities, commodities, derivatives, options, and anything you can imagine. Roxom, rock-solid markets.
So, tell us about your furry friend here. What's his name?
Oh, this? This is Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
It's not just a cat, he's family.
Quite a name, and I must say, looks quite pampered.
Oh, absolutely. Bitcoin deserves nothing but the best. He's my little prince.
But with such a valuable pet, aren't you afraid of losing him?
Losing Bitcoin? No, it never happened before, so it's not something I worry about. Excuse me for a moment. Bitcoin, stay here, right?
Bitcoin, no! Bitcoin, come on, little buddy, Bitcoin, I need you. Don't go.
The future of capital markets runs on Bitcoin. Introducing Roxom, the first ever exchange where Bitcoiners can trade treasury stocks entirely in BTC. Get exposure to top Bitcoin holding companies like MicroStrategy and Metaplanet, priced in Bitcoin from the start. No fiat, no middlemen. This is what financial freedom looks like. Early access now live at roxom.com/treasuries. Built by Bitcoiners for Bitcoiners.
Now, inevitably, some retail is going to participate and try to be along for the ride in the trade, because this is something you can just access in your brokerage account and the information is out there. But if all you do is attempt a rocket booster stage leveraging retail and you fail to get to institutional scale and get into, really like tens of billions of dollars flowing into your leveraged Bitcoin equity, then really you haven't made a dent in anything. We're working with a bunch of Bitcoin treasury companies of various flavors. I think one of the biggest new incremental sort of wins here will be being able to make a really strong case for companies holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet, even if they don't become a full LBE. And I think that's something that we're really focused on, because I do think that is something that, again, can make a dent in the universe. Not everybody's going to go whole hog and just become a leveraged Bitcoin equity or Bitcoin accumulation machine or whatever it is, but every business can benefit from having some Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And I want to just make it easier and easier to see why that's the case.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to Stefan Livera podcast, brought to you by Bold. American listeners, you can buy Bitcoin at Bold and also earn the highest Bitcoin back rewards with the Bold debit card. Rejoining me on the show today is Corey Clipston, CEO and co-founder of Swan Bitcoin. Corey, welcome back to the show.
Hey Stefan, it's great to see you, man.
So Corey, I know we were chatting a bit offline about, this is one thing people have been talking about, like altcoin season. Is that going to happen, or is it going to be more like LBE and treasury company season? So yeah, let's get your thoughts there. What's your latest thinking on that?
Well, we're recording on the morning of July 21st, and it appears that both are in full swing. So not surprising that eventually there would be some kind of bounce off the floor when it comes to the centralized altcoins. But you just have to look at the zoomed out chart and think about having to hold any of those for their 80% drawdown versus Bitcoin to enjoy a little bump. here from the bottom. And just in the long run, of course, all 30 million of them trend towards zero in Bitcoin terms inevitably.
Of course, yeah. And I think what we see, I was just looking some basic numbers, ran some, AI stats, and some of these have, yes, it's true, some of them have had a little bit of a bump in fiat terms and a little bit in Bitcoin terms, but they're basically all of them are still down quite a bit from their all-time high in Bitcoin terms. And I think that's really the real number. That's the real benchmark, isn't it?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you were with us when we ran these numbers a few times and kind of updated it every couple of years or whatever. And there have only been 2 altcoins in history that have had a second all-time high in Bitcoin terms. There was Ripple had a higher high in 17 than it did in 13, and Doge, because of the Elon pump, had a higher high